Well, good morning and Shabbat Shalom and welcome. I'm Rabbi Ed Feinstein here in Southern California, where it is approximately 103 degrees this Shabbos morning. Welcoming my dear friend, Rabbi Marc Gellman in South Florida, where it is
93 degrees.
Yes, but you have humidity, thank you.
Yes, we do.
Right.
It's haze out there. It's haze.
It's a abyssal haze. It's wonderful to be together. This morning, we're going to do some Torah study together. And we're so glad to welcome all of you. This morning, we are in the middle, the most interesting part of the book of Bamidbar. Bamidbar, the fourth book of the Hebrew Bible, is the story of our trek from Mount Sinai to the Promised Land. And this morning, believe it or not, 2 years, 2 weeks, 2 days after we've left Egypt, we have arrived. We have arrived in the Promised Land, at the boundaries of the Promised Land. And God tells Moshe, send 12 guys into the land to scout it out. And Moshe picks 12 princes of the people of Israel, sends them into the Promised Land. They all come back with a glowing, glowing report of what a fruitful and special land this is. But then 10 of the spies turn on the dream. And they remark to the people that the people of this land are too much for us. They are anakim. They are giants. They are Nephilim. They are these mythical creatures. We felt like grasshoppers in their presence, and that's the way we must have looked to them too. And the people are despondent. They're despairing, and they turn on Moses once again and say, was it for this that you brought us out of Egypt where we were safe, to die here in the wilderness at the hands of these monsters? And only Joshua and Caleb, only these two of the 12, they tell the people, what are you talking about? We have beat every adversary. We beat Egypt. We have beat all the adversaries of the desert. Don't be afraid. But they're not listened to. And it's in this Torah portion that God realizes that these people will never be worthy of the land. They will never be capable of mustering the initiative, of mustering the courage to enter their own dreams. They will always be afraid. This is a generation raised in slavery, raised with the security, the canopy of security that comes with being a slave. And they will never be able to take initiative and be independent in order to take hold of their own dreams. And so he sends them back out into the desert to die so that their children might come back one day and take the land. Now, one of the really interesting questions of this Torah portion is like, why was it that 10 guys went into this land, 12 guys went into the land, 10 of them see one thing and 2 of them see another? How can that possibly be? How can they see the same land, experience the same journey, and come out with such different conclusions about the capacity of this people to take the land? And I want to suggest just a little idea here. When Moses sends the people into the land, the scouts, he says to them, I want you to go, and the Hebrew phrase is latur et haaretz. Now, the translation you'll find in your Chumash, in your Bible, is to scout out the land. But the truth is the word latur doesn't occur anywhere else in the Bible. And so it's not exactly sure what the word latur means, right? Except at the end of the Torah portion, we're going to have a mitzvah. You'll see that later in the Torah portion, there's a series of small mitzvot, of symbols of God's presence in this people. And one of them is tzitziot, fringes that we put on our garments. And the fringe, the section, which is read as part of our daily Shema, says to the people, I want you to wear these fringes, that you don't go latur, you don't go wandering, following after your heart and your eyes, but instead you follow the word of God. So I want to make a strange suggestion. If you look up the word latur in a dictionary, Hebrew dictionary, a modern Hebrew dictionary, the word latur means to be a tourist. To be a tourist. And that raises a really interesting idea. You think about people come to a place, a new place, a place they've never been. Think of the different attitudes that they can come with. Person can come as an immigrant, meaning I'm leaving behind where I came from and I'm ready to settle in this new land. Person comes a refugee, meaning I'm running away from the place I came from, and I'll stay here as long as I need to. Person can come on a visit. Person can come on a business trip, or a person can come as a tourist. You ever see tourists? I remember living in Israel for many years. I was a student in Israel for a couple of years and watching tourists in Israel. Such an interesting thing, right? So having lived there for a long enough time, you start to dress like an Israeli, and I started to talk like an Israeli, and I had sandals on, and I'd look at these people, and they were like my people, but they were different than me because they were still tourists. Now, what is a tourist? It's a tourist like views a place through the thick smoked windows of a tour bus. And then when the tourist has the courage to get off the bus, they come off the bus, and the way they're dressed and the way they carry themselves, and then it communicates like, don't touch me. I don't want this place to touch me. I want to see it. I want to experience it. I'm sightseeing, but I don't want to become part of this place. And I don't want this place to become part of me. And the biggest emblem of this, of course, is that they wear a giant camera on their chest, right? And this giant camera says, back off. It looks like an astronaut's life support. So I don't have to breathe the atmosphere of this place. It was a great book many years ago called The Accidental Tourist.
Yeah.
It was about a guy who wrote travel guides for business people who had to go abroad and wanted to live American lives, right? And it was like where you could find Kentucky Fried Chicken in Beijing, or where you could find Taco Bell in Islamabad. And you realize that the guy who writes these books, that's the way he lived his life. There are people who live their life like tourists. They don't belong in this life. They're not interested in letting this life touch them. They're so afraid of the pain of letting life touch them that they're going to experience life, with a distance, And that's what God tells the people at the end. He says to them, Lo taturu, don't go through life like a tourist. This is life. You live here. Let it touch you. Let it touch you. Don't be afraid. Go through life, as a resident, as someone welcoming, you're welcomed home. It's a very different attitude than going through life as a tourist. Now, what happened in the story is, of course, that 10 of the guys didn't see this as our land. They sort of saw it as a land. And because they didn't see it as our land, they came as a tourist and they had no commitment. Like it's sort of like, like the way you stay in a hotel, right? A hotel doesn't belong to you. So, you can mess up the room because someone's going to come clean it for you. And if there's something broken, you complain about it, but don't try to fix it. And you don't really care who the people next door are because you don't live here. That's how 10 of them came to the land. But 2 of them understood that this land was promised to us. And this was not a strange land. This was home. We're coming home. And that's the difference. And so this is a meditation then, not only on Israelites and the promised land and the role of fear in keeping us from the dreams of life, but this is really a very interesting meditation on the attitudes we adopt as we jump into life. And then following the story of the spies is a whole series of mitzvot. And Marc, talk to me about those mitzvot and what you find there.
First of all, that was beautiful. And the difference between tourists and residents is just so profound and important. And that's why when we took groups to Israel, I always tried to do everything possible to put my people in situations where they had to interact with Israelis. Like in the north, particularly, we would not stay at a hotel. We would stay at a kibbutz guest house. And then we'd have discussions with kibbutzniks and, about their life. And there was a real connection there, not as much as it should be. And I remember living in Israel as well for over a year. I remember it took me a while to not be a tourist. It took me a while to get sandals that fit me and that to know how to eat hummus with a whole onion. I mean, there are things you have to learn. And finally, in the end, it was impossible for me to imagine myself as a Jew without imagining myself as B'nai Zion, B'nai Zion. I mean, as part of the community of Zion and rooted in the land. It was my main move that kept me from being what they call in German a Luftmensch, which meant a person of the air, someone just not rooted anywhere. So going back to Israel was the most important historical event of Jewish history, other than leaving Egypt, I think. But going back to Israel was nothing, because the task was to get Israel into you, not just your body into the area, but to get you into it. Just, like the challenge of the Exodus was not to get out of Egypt, but to get Egypt out of you. So I just love what you said, and I think it's profoundly true. I have a typically weird Gellman take on stuff, and it's based on one of my basic Gellman rules, which I always invent as I tell you them. I never had the rule until I just said it, but this is one of my Gellman rules, and that rule is some of the most seemingly insignificant mitzvot have the deepest meaning. I mean, you don't have to go very far to realize lo tirtzach, don't murder somebody, is a major rule. Lo tignov, don't steal, that's a major rule and has major impact. And it doesn't take any creativity or insight to realize that. But there's a law in this parsha. From the first of your dough, this is the law of Challah, mitzvah of Challah. It's arisotechem Challah tarimu, which means from the first of your dough, you shall set aside a challah gift. Okay, from the first of your dough. So what is that? Well, first of all, there is a major misconception about challah that I need to clear up, and that is that challah isn't braided egg bread. Braided egg bread is braided egg bread. It's not challah, which everyone, not 100% of people you tell that to say, what are you, nuts? What are you, a Reform rabbi? Don't you know anything? And I say, no, I actually know something. And what I know is that's not a challah. A challah is made of dough, and when the dough is mixed, you take a pinch of the dough, called the challah. Lahafrish challah is the mitzvah, and the bracha, which ends with lahafrish challah. And you take some of the dough, and you throw it into the oven to be burned up. How much the rabbis even talk about, it's 1/24 of the amount of dough if you're a regular person, and half that if you're a professional baker. They had sympathy for the professionals who had to make money from this. So they let them do challah with less of a burden on them. So that's what makes the challah you bake, the braided egg bread, challah, kosher challah. And I think about that mitzvah, and I always, when I make challah, I always take a piece and I burn it. And my grandma, my Baba, she did that. She never explained anything to me, but I saw her do it and it looked weird. And when I was friends with the Streitz family, and I would go into the Streitz matzah factory and go up to where they mix the dough, they would take a piece of the dough and throw it into a bucket that they would burn at the end of the day. And I knew what they were doing. And I would tell the people I brought with me, that is the mitzvah of challah. So it's I would say, I would make a guess, Eddie, that it's the least recognized, least observed of all the mitzvot. Far more people wear tzitzis than do hala frish challah. But my take on it has nothing to do with burning up bread dough. It has to do with marriage. Because it's my feeling that the mitzvah of challah is a secret message to people who are married. Because it's in the mitzvah that I betroth myself. And so when I marry you as a God to the people, I say, take the challah. So there was a connection there that was always chewing at me. I said, you know what? Our marriage to God is like our marriage to our partner. And it's the same in this way. If there isn't a piece of your marriage that involves sacrificing something for God, for the sake of God, but also for the sake of your marriage, then you have a marriage with a cancer in it, a weakness in it. That means let's say you say to each other, part of our marriage is going to be going to Shabbat services together. It will help strengthen our marriage, and it's also something that, we have to do. We should do personally, individually. And that's what I think it means. It means that you have to have something that you sacrifice for God, some of your dough, and I mean dough in the two senses, some of your money, some of your time, some of your substance. It has to be something that you sacrifice for God. And I think that's what the mitzvah of challah is all about. I heard a phrase which troubled me deeply recently. And the phrase was, well, we're getting married, we love each other, and it's certainly a good starter marriage. Now, I had never heard that phrase, a starter marriage. But what they were saying, and they weren't laughing, they were not laughing, was, yeah, it's a good starting marriage, and if it doesn't work out, so we'll separate and we'll find someone else for our second marriage, because there's no taboo against divorce. And so the commitment that they were saying that they were making to each other was extremely minimal.
Yeah.
Almost like I'm contracting for a tennis instructor.
And they're tourists. That's the point.
Exactly.
Right.
I'm going to be a tourist in my own marriage. Right. So that's my take on something that nobody really sees, and I might be wrong, but I'm saying that's how it got me.
Oh, I love this. First of all, because I love challah, and I grew up in a house of a baker.
Yes, you did.
My parents had a bakery, so challah has been an important part of my spiritual life since I'm young. And this weekend, my wife and I celebrate our anniversary.
Yes.
And this was the parsha we read at our Ofruf. So I remember that very carefully because they announced that because it was so important. And it's a beautiful idea because I would go one step, just so beautiful. One step, it's not just that you're giving up something. You're recognizing that there's something in our domestic life, in our home, that is of cosmic proportion, cosmic sanctity. And even, and that we can see that, because home life gets to be tedious. It's putting meals on the table and taking the trash out and feeding the kids, and it can get tedious, and you have to stop occasionally and say, wait a minute, there's something sacred about this. There's something deeply holy about creating a place in a world where human beings are nurtured, creating a place where love is nurtured, where family is nurtured, where friendship can exist, to set a table and to share a table, to share a meal. Again, this is part of the rabbinic revolution that I read in the early generations of the rabbis, was when the Holy Temple was destroyed in Jerusalem. They shifted the holiness of the temple to three institutions: synagogue, school, and home. Synagogue existed already. It existed since the time the first temple was destroyed. School was the great center of rabbinic Judaism because rabbinic Judaism is an academic pursuit, as a literary pursuit, as well as a spiritual pursuit, or through a academic pursuit, it's a spiritual pursuit. But the most interesting thing was the home, to tie domesticity to spirituality, to say that the home is now a place where you meet God. Now, all of us know this, we just don't recognize this. The table becomes an altar, says the rabbis. We gather around the table and recite a prayer called Kiddush, which is holiness, and bespeaks the Kodesh HaKodashim, the Holy of Holies. And the Challah, again, as you said beautifully, is not just braided egg bread. The Challah is an offering. It's an offering which ties heaven and earth together. It's an offering which raises up this meal into something sacred. It's an offering which says we're giving up, not giving up, but giving to the domain of the sacred, some part of ourselves. It's a beautiful statement, Marc, and it's a remarkable idea. I told you once I had a very dear friend who was an Episcopal priest, and he came to spend Shabbos with us once. And he sat at our table and he watched us do this. He watched us make Kiddush. We had little kids at the time, so it was a challenge, So the Kiddush, and you make motzi, and we bless the kids. And I'm looking, and my friend has tears in his eyes. I said, what? He says, I've been doing communion since I'm a child, and I never knew this. I never knew the spirit of this table. And now I understand what my communion means. What the Christian faith means when it says, when you drink when you drink the wine and when you eat the challah, I'll be with you. He says the emotionality it was reverent, it was powerful, it was experienced, but the emotionality of the love of the table and the sanctity of children coming to their parents and then getting so close. And he said, this I never understood. And now he said, I'll never do communion the same way again. I was just touched by that.
Absolutely. I have a similar story, which got famous because of the book, The Jew and the Lotus. I was at the meeting with the Dalai Lama in New Jersey when he came over for the first time to meet rabbis, first time a Buddha has ever met rabbis. And the person who runs the place is one of my dearest friends, a Jewish woman who became a Buddhist. And Diana said, you've got to be here, Marc. You're the only one in the whole room who studied Buddhism and who knows what this is about. And he wants to talk to rabbis, and you have to be there. So we went, and there were a whole bunch of people there. Art Green was there, and Yitz and Blue Greenberg were there, and there were a whole bunch of people there, big time rabbis, and me. And then he gets up and he says, thank you. It's the first time this has ever happened in history that a Buddha has met with rabbis. I, by the way, don't think that's true. I think that there were connections with Ezra, because he lived at the same time, and Jeremiah possibly, and I think Isaiah also, even though the dates don't exactly correspond. And I believe there was connection through the Silk Road and the Spice Road and all that, up through Asia and then down into India. And so they went around and they each said what they thought. So he asked his question. He says, there's about 6 million Jews in America, and there's about 6 million Buddhists in the world. And we are disappearing. Buddhists are disappearing. People are leaving the faith, and you are still around after 4,000 years. And he said, I want to know, what is your secret? It was so brilliant, so simple, so perfect. And the rabbis who were there each got up and they had an answer. One rabbi got up, might have been Larry Kushner, I forget, but one got up and said, the Talmud, we teach and we learn and we seek, and we always learning and teaching, and that learning and teaching, that passion for that has kept us alive. And the Dalai Lama, His Holiness, would just smile, but he didn't say anything. Then Art Green got up and he held up Mizrach, and he said, "This was our secret. We always face toward Jerusalem, and the Mizrach we put in our room shows us the direction toward Zion. That's our secret. We always prayed for Zion, to go to Zion, to be in Zion, not to be tourists, although he didn't use your beautiful word." And Dalai Lama smiles, doesn't say anything. And then someone gets up and says, shakes a tzedakah box. Look, so this is our secret. We give tzedakah. We always give charity. And that charitable impulse has kept us alive. And he took the tzedakah box and shook it like a rattle and smiled. Finally, Yitz and Blue stood up, and they held hands, and they looked at him, and they said, "We are a family, and many Jewish rituals are only for our home, and we practice them in our home. And our marriage is like a sanctuary. Our home is like a sanctuary, like a temple. And we instill Jewish values in our home, and we pray in our home, and we have foods that are special in our home." And the Dalai Lama stood up and smiled and spoke and said, "That is your secret."
Mm.
And it's exactly what you were saying.
It's a really beautiful idea.
And there's many ways into that idea. Challah is into that idea. Traveling to Israel. I guess the camera example, by the way, is a little outdated because now everyone takes it through their smartphone.
Yeah, but they hold the smartphone up like
The
this
same
is
way,
defense.
right?
And that's a way of saying, back off. I don't want to be part of your world.
I agree. But that's the idea here, is that our lives are not constructed to simply appease our own selfish needs, even if they're the needs of our family and not ourselves personally.
Mm-hmm.
We must have a dedication to strengthening ourselves and strengthening our families by giving something to God. Now the question becomes, Ed, what would it mean to make challah in your marriage? What would that look like? And to that, I say to our listeners, you tell us. You tell us what it would mean. Or better yet, tell yourself. Because if you're thinking that way, what can I do to make my marriage stronger by offering challah in it? You're thinking the right question. And whatever you decide is going to strengthen you. And it's going to strengthen your marriage. I mean, I can't tell you how many divorce counselings I've gone through in which basically the problem was it was a starter marriage. These were people just operating on their own self-needs and their own self-interest. And the marriage was a good way to satisfy that. But it wasn't a commitment. It wasn't a spiritual union. That requires someone getting married with a certain attitude that I'm getting married because I can't live a fulfilling Jewish life alone. That's why when you look at the Jewish ritual calendar and our schedule of holiday practices, it's Shabbos. What does it mean to have Shabbos alone? What does that even mean? It doesn't mean anything. Shabbos is something when your family's together. So the whole point of this little mitzvah, that if I could translate it this way, when I marry you, you should set aside a challah gift I think that's what God intends for all of us all the time.
That's a beautiful statement. That's a really lovely statement.
Thanks.
To be able to say this is my soulmate and I'm giving myself fully to this marriage, and I recognize that there is a cosmic dimension to this.
Yes.
There is a sacred dimension to this, and it's going to demand things of me. It's also the vulnerability of it. I find that so many folks are afraid of getting hurt, and so they're going to hold back, not going to commit. They're not going to give themselves to any relationship because they're terrified of being hurt. And I can certainly identify with that. I mean, all of us have been hurt and all of us know what that's like. But the problem is that if you don't put your full self in, you're not going to be ready. You're never going to have that full relationship, the full love of a marriage. And that's a catastrophe. Then it's a partnership of some sort, even a friendship or an acquaintanceship, but it's not marriage.
No.
Marriage, someone once said, marriage isn't 50-50, it's 100-100. It's a matter of putting your full self in and being completely vulnerable to the circumstance, because that's the only way that it happens.
I
Marc,
think,
yeah, go ahead.
no, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Well, so I want to not push back, but I'm not sure that's right about the 100-100. It sounds good, and it's a nice lesson. But what I'm arguing for is much more, I think, subtle and true. And that is, it's perfectly okay for you to pursue your own career, your own interests, your own desires that have nothing to do with your partner. That's perfectly fine. Mm-hmm. But what is not fine is for you to only do that. There has to be, because the challah wasn't the whole amount of dough. You realize is if you gave all the dough away,
you'd have no challah.
And therefore no Shabbos, and therefore, you'd be hungry. So the idea is get enough to feed yourself, feed your family, feed your material needs. But remember that it's not challah because it's braided egg bread. It's challah because you took some of the dough and offered a challah gift. And it's up to you and your partner, to figure out what that gift should be.
Well, I mean, then let's not I mean, it's beautiful when you talk about marriage in this way, but I think that in a certain way you can talk about anything this way.
Yes, I think so.
Talk about pursuing a career as whatever you do in the world, and take 1/24 of your career and make it an offering. So if you're a teacher or a lawyer or a doctor or a business executive or an artist or a cook or whatever you do, whatever it is you do, to make a little piece of it tzedakah, a little piece of it kedusha, a little piece of it holiness, so that as you're working you're also working for something bigger than yourself.
Yeah,
that's a beautiful way to live your life. It's a beautiful lesson for everything you do.
And now I can explain to you finally.
Yeah.
I'm sure it was always a slight mystery to you. And that is my love, my passion for golf. There's no question that I'm not the best rabbi. You're the best rabbi. And there's no question that I'm not the best golfer. Not clear who is nowadays, but it was once Tiger Woods, the best golfer. But it is entirely possible that I am the best rabbi golfer who ever lived. And when I'm out on the golf course and I'm playing golf and I'm, meditating on what the swing means and the joy I have when it's good and the patience I try to call up when it's a bad swing, I'm very conscious that this is something for me. It's for me. It's the dough that is not part of challah. But it's not my whole life. And it's interesting. I would ask you, Eddie, since both of us spent all our professional life working for God, what does challah mean for us? That's what golf means for me. But what does challah mean to you?
That's a wonderful, that's actually a very deep question.
Yes, it is.
Because you know what happens in these, people look at us and they see us doing holy work.
Yeah.
They say, well, everything you do is godly. You're giving
Yeah.
up the whole challah to God,
That's
but
the
it's
point.
not. It's not. And frankly, I have to remind myself from time to time that the stuff I'm doing really is l'shem shamayim, is for the purpose of a larger vision of the world and a larger process of tikkun and the larger process of God's presence, bringing God's presence into the world, and not simply the administration of an institution or the management of a human resources or even the presentation of a drasha, and again, let's go a little deeper. We have a few friends who do this work.
Yeah.
And they do this work for the sake of their own ego and not for something bigger.
A fair point. And I also, that's true. And you and I both know many young rabbis who say, you know what? I insist on my employment contract that I have personal time. And I always was so contemptuous of that attitude because I thought, do you realize how Eddie works? Do you realize how I work? Do you have any concept of the amount of hours we put in? And you come here, you little pisher, and you say, I want my own time. And now I realize they were right. They were right and I was wrong. And so that's why I'm asking you, Rabbi Feinstein, what is your challah? And your challah is your whole career. What is you without the challah? Where do you find yourself without your title, without your role? What lifts you up in that way?
So, I mean, I like learning. I went into this business not because I had the ambition to stand on a pulpit, but because I like learning and I like working with kids. I like being with children. I like telling.
You're learning Jewish stuff.
Yeah. It ends up being used in some fashion. It has its utilitarian value, but at the moment when I'm doing it, I enjoy it, and I enjoy being with kids. I enjoy playing with kids and telling stories to kids and leading kids. So as soon as I'm done with this job, I'm going back to being a camp counselor. That's what I want to do.
That sounds good. We know a rabbi who retired and spent time painting.
Yeah, beautifully.
Yeah, he's a good painter.
Really beautifully.
And I always love that. I love that because it shows that there was something beyond his work for God. Ours is the reverse challenge.
Yeah, that's true.
Ours is the reverse challenge.
Well, that's always hard when you have when you're doing moral work. I have a friend who's a doctor who has the same issue. Saving lives. How does he say, I'm going home now? Take time. But I told him he's the resource. And if the resource burns out, then the resource is not worth anything.
And I believe
for that utilitarian purpose, for that pragmatic purpose, I got him to take some time off. And then when he did it, he began to realize that parts of him were being left behind in the pursuit of his work. And slowly he's become more of a mensch.
And you and I both know rabbis who are burned out. Enormously skilled rabbis, enormously gifted rabbis, but they burned out. And my presumption, I don't know what yours was, but my presumption was always, well, they burned out because they were working too much. I don't think that's it. I think they burned out because they didn't have a non-challah life. Everything in their life was challah, and therefore, and they had nothing else. And there's one rabbi whom we know well, and he discovered that he loves fly fishing. Ich weiß, but he loves fly fishing. I once said to him, do you have those little, the vest with the fly?
Oh gosh, I'm sure he does. Yeah,
I'm sure he does too.
And for me, fly fishing is running to the market for gefilte fish. That's
right.
Fly fishing I ever do.
Or you get from the case with the fits all cleaned, the fish from them. But it's his thing. It's his thing. So when I talk to young rabbis now, when I mentor them, my first question is, tell me what your hobbies are. And if they don't have any hobbies, which is the part of them for them, I worry about them.
See, maybe I'm reading this backwards than you are. I'm reading it backwards because for me, there's a song by James Taylor, the great folk singer, and he's singing a song. Right, he sings a song called "It's Rock and Roll Man," and he's singing to a young singer who's just entering the business. And there's a line in that which I love. He says, "Save some for yourself." And when I hear you say challah, save some for yourself. Like,
oh yeah, you're reading it the other way, which is also beautiful.
We're giving it all away. We're giving away so much of ourselves.
That's our lesson.
My doctor friend gives away so much. I have a friend who does public service law. Guy works 16 hours a day, giving it away. And the problem is, if you don't save something for yourself, there isn't some domain, a Shabbos in your life, a room in your heart, a place where you get to sit and just recharge and rebuild and do it, not because it's ever going to be useful, although it might end up being, but simply because it fills you up again with a sense that you're important and worthy and have sanctity within you. That's how I'm reading it.
No, and I see that, and that's exactly right for us. For us, our hobbies are our challah.
Yeah.
And the rest of the dough
is what we're giving away to the world.
Is our Jewish life.
We're feeding the world with the rest of my challah. That's the idea. Well, Marc, listen, it's time to go. And I want to say,
go to Aspen now.
I know, I want to say thank you. This is going to be our closing session for the summer, only for the summer. We're coming back first Shabbos in September. The first Shabbat, Marc is going off to Aspen to become the rabbi of the Aspen Jewish congregation, right? I'm going to be visiting him during the summer. We'll do a program which will be up online. I'm going to be here at VBS. We're going to have prayers every Shabbos, as well as minyan every day, of course. And I look forward to seeing folks. But we're going to be taking Shabbat hiatus from this Torah study. So first, let me just say.
And then I'll be back.
Then I'll be back too.
What a strange thing.
A big thank you to my dear friend, Rabbi Gellman. Because you've given up so much time and effort and so much insight. And we've had such a great time together with this dialogue over this year. It has truly been an honor and a gift to us. And so thank you, Marc, so much.
Yes.
It has really been a gift. And to Betty, who gave you up for these hours, I thank you, Betty, wherever you are.
Yeah, no.
And take good
care. I couldn't imagine my life without you in it, and I couldn't imagine anything that I do on Shabbos that is more important to me than my discussions with you. It's my challah. This is my challah.
Well, go to Aspen, stand in the mountains, and say hello to the Kodesh Baruch Hu, because that's where God vacations in the summer. And I'll meet you there at the end of July. And to everyone who's listening, following this, of course, service from VBS every Shabbos morning, 10 o'clock. We'll be back in September with Torah study. Have a very, very, very peaceful and loving Shabbat.
Shabbat Shalom, my dear friend.